the gatekeeper of Dusty Creek Ranch. My name is Caleb Hart. I'm a 42-year-old retired military veteran who spent over 2 decades in service, 6 deployments, 3 continents, and 1 titanium plate in my leg to show for it. After my discharge, I decided it was time to slow down and live a life of peace, freedom, and most of all, privacy. That's how I ended up here, on a 50-acre slice of paradise called Dusty Creek Ranch, just outside the sleepy town of Redwood Hollow. The ranch wasn't much when I bought it: a rundown barn, a weather-beaten fence, and a house with a roof that whistled in the wind. But I poured every drop of sweat and savings into making it my home. And now, it's a sanctuary: wide open skies, horses that roam freely, and no neighbors in sight. Or so I thought. When I say no neighbors, I mean the kind you don't hear about until it's too late. Hidden behind the oak groves, across the dry riverbed, was a development that had cropped up 2 years ago like a mole in the dark: Cypress Ridge Estates. A gated HOA community, complete with weekly lawn checks, mailbox audits, and the infamous quarterly visual compliance drone sweeps. And at the center of that hornet's nest was Karen Whitmore. HOA Queen Supreme. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. No, Karen was a force of nature, a bureaucratic whirlwind with a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, always ready to call higher authorities over a leaf out of place. She ran the HOA like a tight ship. Residents whispered her name with dread. Fence too high? Karen's got a tape measure. Grass too long? She'll take a photo at 6 a.m. and fine you before you finish your coffee. No. You might ask, what's she got to do with me? I'm not in the HOA. My ranch is private property, separated by county land. But apparently, that didn't stop Karen from thinking she had jurisdiction. It all started on a warm spring Tuesday. The unwanted visitor, I was out by the stables brushing down Bandit, my rescue Mustang, when I noticed a silver Range Rover crawling up my long gravel driveway. My ranch entrance had a wrought iron gate with a sign that read clearly, "Private property. No trespassing. Ranch is under video surveillance." Didn't seem to faze the driver. The gate was closed, of course. But that didn't stop Karen from stepping out in full HOA regalia: tennis visor, name tag from a community leadership seminar, and a clipboard stuffed with papers like she was prepping for a zoning war. I hit the speaker button from my phone, which connects to the gate's intercom system. "Can I help you?" She looked up, squinting. "Yes, this is Karen Whitmore, president of the Cypress Ridge HOA. I'm here to inspect your fence line. It appears part of it extends beyond your legal property." I blinked. "Ma'am, I didn't request an inspection, and you don't have jurisdiction here." She puffed up like a bird on alert. "Sir, your fence borders our community's visual perimeter. It is our right under the Cypress Ridge Code of Aesthetic Standards to request visibility compliance for any neighboring structures. That includes fences. Now, if you'll kindly buzz me in." I didn't even let her finish. "Ma'am, this is not Cypress Ridge. This is Dusty Creek Ranch. My land, my rules. You step foot on this property without permission, and you're trespassing. You've been warned." Then I hung up. For a minute, I thought she'd leave. Instead, she pulled out her phone. The 911 call. She didn't just dial the sheriff. No, she called 911 for a refusal to comply with community visual guidelines and possible hostile behavior. I watched through the camera as she told the dispatcher that a belligerent man was threatening her from behind a locked gate and that she feared for her safety. That's what I called my wife. Meet Detective Eliza Hart. Eliza is not just my wife. She's also Detective Eliza Hart of the Redwood County Sheriff's Department. 12 years on the force, expert in community disputes, and the person you don't want to lie to, especially not on a recorded 911 call. I told her what happened. She sighed. Again? I told you that woman has HOA syndrome. I'll head over before. It escalates. Within 10 minutes, a cruiser pulled into my driveway. It wasn't Eliza. It was Deputy Sanchez, a young officer I knew from town. He parked on my side of the gate and walked over. Karen still outside in a huff. "Caleb," Sanchez said with a knowing look, "you didn't threaten her, did you?" I showed him the video feed from my security system audio, and everything. Karen saw me pointing at the screen and shouted, "That's an invasion of privacy. He's recording me without my consent." Sanchez barely hid his smile. "Ma'am, this is private property, and California law permits video surveillance of your own land. Plus, he didn't record inside your home. You're outside a gate. Now, what exactly is the emergency?" Karen looked flustered. "I am the president of the HOA, and I was enforcing visual compliance. That fence is an eyesore." Sanchez looked at the dusty old wood rail fence that's been standing since 1965. "You mean the fence that was here before your development even existed?" Karen sputtered. "That doesn't matter. We have rights. I demand entry." Sanchez raised a hand. "Ma'am, unless you have a warrant, court order, or the property owner's permission, you're trespassing." That's when Eliza pulled up. When a detective arrives, she stepped out, dressed casually, badge on her hip. Karen didn't recognize her at first. "Ma'am," Eliza said, "I'm Detective Hart. I understand you called 911. Karen's eyes lit up like she was finally getting back up. "Yes." "Thank you. This man, he's threatening me. He has dangerous animals and a gun." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "I live here." Karen paled. "I what? You're his wife." "That's right. And I heard everything on the 911 call." "You lied." "To dispatch. That's a misdemeanor offense." Karen's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't mean to lie." Eliza's tone sharpened. "You said he was threatening you." "He wasn't. You said he had a weapon." "He didn't. That's abuse of emergency services. You can be fined or even charged." Karen started to tremble. "But I'm the HOA president." "And that means nothing." "Out here," Eliza said. "You're lucky Caleb didn't press charges." The turning point, after a good scolding and a written warning from Sanchez, Karen was escorted back to her Range Rover. She left with her clipboard clutched like a life preserver, her authority crumbling behind her. Eliza and I watched her disappear down the gravel road. "That woman," Eliza said, shaking her head. "You know this won't be the last time." "I know," I replied. "But I've got 50 acres, good fences, and a detective wife. Let her try." Lessons from the gate that day, I realized something. Some people wrap themselves in rules not to build community, but to control it. But boundaries, whether fences or personal ones, exist for a reason. Karen learned that you can't enforce HOA rules on private land, no matter how fancy your title is. And more importantly, the truth eventually comes out, especially when it's caught on camera. And me? I learned that sometimes standing your ground isn't just about property lines. It's about peace of mind. The drone, the deception, and the deputy 2 weeks passed after the infamous gate incident. And for a while, life on Dusty Creek Ranch returned to its peaceful rhythm. I went back to my days of early morning coffee on the porch, long rides through the back trails with Bandit, and the occasional weekend trip into Redwood Hollow for supplies. The flowers bloomed heavy that spring. Bees were buzzing around the lavender bushes Eliza had planted out front, and I had finally begun restoring the old barn roof, something I'd put off for 2 seasons. It was the kind of slow, soul-soothing life I had fought hard to earn. But peace, when it's disturbed by certain types of people, never truly resets. It simmers like a pot left on low heat, just waiting to boil over again. And sure enough, the next spark came buzzing literally straight. Out of the sky. It was a Saturday morning, and I was cleaning out the rain gutters while Eliza was inside organizing some case files on her laptop. That's when I heard it, a high-pitched mechanical whirring, like a swarm of wasps with an attitude. At first, I thought it was one of the sheriff department's patrol drones, used occasionally to monitor wildfires or lost livestock. But then I saw it a sleek, black quadcopter hovering just above the eastern edge of our property line, moving slowly and purposefully, like a spy in a low-budget thriller. It zipped across the field, paused over the stables, then glided closer. Toward the house, I waved at it, thinking it might retreat. It didn't. Instead, it hovered as if locking onto me. That's when I saw the camera mounted beneath it. That drone wasn't part of any emergency response team. It was a surveillance model, high-end, commercial grade. The kind you need a license to fly beyond your line of sight. And in that moment, I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen Whitmore. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Karen had made her mission clear. She believed Dusty Creek Ranch was some kind of lawless territory, spoiling the image of her manicured, chemically treated HOA bubble. And now she'd graduated from trespassing at my front gate to conducting aerial reconnaissance. I jogged back inside, found Eliza hunched over her laptop, and told her what I'd seen. She closed her computer immediately. "You're not serious," she said, already grabbing her phone. "Dead serious. The thing was circling the house. Where's it now?" I led her outside, but the drone had vanished back toward the tree, line that marked the boundary between our land and Cypress Ridge. Eliza pulled up the sheriff department's drone registration logs and ran a quick check, no match. She made a few calls, and within an hour, we had confirmation. The drone wasn't operated by any public agency, which meant it was private, unregistered, illegal. "Give it another day," she said, brushing hair from her face, her eyes hard. With resolve, she'll try again. But next time, we'll be ready. The next day, I set up 3 trail cams motion-activated, with night vision and infrared strategically placed around the property. One faced the eastern fence line near the stables, another was mounted on the tallest tree in the orchard, and the third sat nestled in the ivy on the tool shed roof. If Karen or her drone came back, we'd know. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon Monday, the buzzing returned. This time, it swooped in lower, flying almost brazenly through the branches over my back pasture, then made a full circle around the barn. It hovered for nearly 5 minutes near the west-facing bedroom, window Eliza's home office, before finally darting away again. But this time, we got her. The trail cam footage was crystal clear close-up shots of the drone, including a distinct serial number etched into its base. And if that wasn't enough, Eliza, ever the detail-oriented detective, froze one frame that showed the drone flying back toward Cypress Ridge, right toward a 2-story house on the corner lot. And sitting in the front yard, a silver Range Rover, unmistakably familiar. Armed with evidence, we drove into town and paid a visit to the sheriff's office. Deputy Sanchez met us at the front desk, sipping coffee and reading a wildlife complaint report. When he saw the footage, his eyebrows shot up. "You're telling me she flew this thing over your home?" "Twice," Eliza said. "No warrant, no consent. That's illegal aerial surveillance." Sanchez nodded. "That's a violation of Penal Code 632. A person can't use any electronic device to intentionally record a confidential communication without consent, especially not on private property." "She's gone too far," I added. "I don't want this to escalate, but if she's spying now, what's next?" Sanchez leaned back and sighed. "You want to file a formal complaint?" Eliza hesitated, then said, "Not yet. Let's give her a warning first, see if she'll back off." That afternoon, Sanchez drove over to Cypress Ridge. We followed discreetly and parked 2 blocks away. From a distance, we saw him knock on Karen's door. She opened it with her usual superiority, arms folded, chin high. He spoke to her for a full 15 minutes. From what I could make out, her posture went from defensive to fidgety to downright agitated. When he finally turned to leave, she slammed. The door behind him. Sanchez met us back at the cruiser. She denied flying it, he said. Claimed someone else in the HO. I might have done it on her behalf. But get this, she called it a neighborhood beautification survey drone. I laughed. You're kidding. I wish I were. I told her if that drone comes near your property again, she could face criminal charges. That should cool her off. But as we would learn, it didn't single quotes T. 3 days later, I received a letter in the mail, not from the county, but from the Cypress Ridge HOA. It was a typed citation on official HOA letterhead, demanding that I remove or repaint all outbuildings visible from the eastern neighborhood vista within 14 business days or face a $500 daily fine. It was absurd. I wasn't even part of the HOA. The letter accused my barn of being unsightly and visually disruptive to the harmonious landscape. It cited community guidelines, codes, and compliance paragraphs, all of which had no legal standing on my property. The kicker? It was signed by Karen Whitmore, president. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This was harassment. Eliza stepped in immediately. She drafted a formal cease and desist letter and attached the trail cam footage of the drone. She cited trespassing statutes, privacy laws, and harassment codes. We mailed it, emailed it, and hand-delivered a copy to the HOA office. Dropbox? But Karen? She wasn't done. She had one last move left, one that crossed the line from absurd to dangerous. That Friday night, as the sun dipped low over the hills, I heard something strange. Not the drone this time. It was the distant rumble of an engine, a utility truck. By the sound of it, I looked out the window and spotted two men in reflective vests parked near the edge of my property, unrolling yellow tape and marking the ground with orange spray paint. I marched out to confront them. You boys lost? One of them, mid-40s, looked up from a clipboard. Just surveying for a proposed utility easement. I raised an eyebrow. Who requested this? He looked at the sheet. Cypress Ridge Homeowners Association. I stood frozen. You realize this is private ranch land, right? He looked suddenly uncomfortable. They told us this fence line was under review and that this section was unclaimed. Unclaimed? I laughed. This land has been in continuous ownership since 1957, and I've got every deed to prove it. He paused. Well, if you've got documentation, we'll halt the work immediately. I showed him the property markers and my title survey. His partner packed up the equipment without a word. Later that night, we confirmed Karen had submitted forged property boundary documents to the HOA as internal project review board documents. That made it appear as if part of Dusty Creek Ranch fell under shared jurisdiction. It was the final straw. Eliza filed a formal complaint through the county attorney's office. Within days, Karen received a court summons for filing false documents, privacy violations, and abuse of community governance power. Courtroom chaos and the collapse of a queen bee. There's a distinct weight that settles over you the morning of a court date, especially when the person you're facing is someone who's turned your life into a three-ring circus. That weight is heavier when you're not just standing up for yourself, but for every hard-working, quiet living person who's ever been bullied by someone hiding behind an inflated sense of authority. That morning, I felt it as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tying my collar and brushing dust off my boots. Eliza was already dressed, wearing a sleek navy pantsuit with her detective's badge tucked discreetly in her leather purse. No need to flash it today, unless things went sideways. And knowing Karen Whitmore, they just might, We drove into Redwood Hollow's courthouse just before 9 a.m., parked behind a sheriff's cruiser, and walked into the building like we were stepping onto a battlefield. The courthouse itself was a modest brick structure, nothing like the grand halls you see on television dramas. Just a two-room operation, with a single judge presiding over all minor civil and criminal hearings. But it wasn't the venue that mattered. It was the truth we were bringing with us. Karen was already there when we entered, seated in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked completely out of place, her usual faux business casual look, swapped out for an ill-fitting beige pantsuit that screamed department store clearance. Her lips tightened the moment she saw us, and she had the gall to roll her eyes like we were the ones disrupting her day. Next to her sat a short, grizzled man in a gray suit who must have been her attorney. He had a stack of folders on his lap, and an expression that told me this wasn't his first time defending someone who thought they were smarter than the law. The bailiff called the case. Promptly at 9:30, Hart versus Whitmore, Civil Complaint 302C. We walked into the small courtroom, which had maybe 15 seats for public observers, and one solemn wooden bench at the front where Judge Marianne Colby sat in her robe, glasses perched at the end of her nose like she'd seen too many liars for one lifetime. I liked her already. As we took our seats at the plaintiff's table, Eliza leaned over and whispered, "Don't let her rattle you. Just stick to the facts. Let her unravel herself." Karen's lawyer opened with a statement full of deflection. He claimed the drone was operated independently by a Cypress Ridge volunteer task force. He insisted the HOA had no intention of harassing anyone, and that the property lines were merely under review for easement clarification, a phrase so slippery it made the judge furrow her brow. He tried to paint Karen as a diligent community servant, just trying to maintain neighborhood harmony. I had to fight the urge to scoff. Then it was our turn. Eliza stood up, calm and composed, and approached the bench with a stack of printed evidence, each document neatly tabbed and highlighted. She presented the deed and certified land survey confirming the boundaries of Dusty Creek Ranch, dated and notarized. She followed that with trail cam stills of the drone in flight, matched with the drone's serial number, which was traced back to a purchase made with an HOA-issued credit card. Eliza had already confirmed that via a subpoena request to the vendor. The clincher? A screenshot from a Cypress Ridge HOA meeting minutes document signed by Karen herself, approving the drone's visual compliance operation. For the eastern sector of the development. As each piece of evidence landed, I watched Karen's composure slowly crack. She shifted in her chair. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her blazer. Her eyes darted to her lawyer, who was now flipping through papers with increasing urgency. When the judge asked if she had any direct proof that the barn on my property was a public nuisance or visual blight under any applicable county codes, Karen stammered and said, "It detracts from the ambiance of the community." Judge Colby raised an eyebrow. "That's not a legal standard, Miss Whitmore." Karen, clearly unraveling, blurted out, "But he refuses to cooperate. He doesn't cut his grass on our schedule. He doesn't attend our community board meetings. He doesn't even have holiday lights." The courtroom fell silent. Even her lawyer looked horrified. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Hart does not live in your community. He is not a member of your HOA. You have no legal authority over his property, and your actions, including unauthorized surveillance and falsified property documents, suggest a willful abuse of power." Karen's face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible, but I was trying to protect the community. She cried, her voice growing shrill. "You don't understand what happens when one property goes rogue. It drives down everyone's home values." The judge gave her a long, cold stare. Then she turned to the bailiff. "Please note the defendant's outburst for the record." In the end, the court issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting Karen and any HO, a representative, from contacting me, stepping on my property, flying drones near Dusty Creek Ranch, or initiating any property-related requests or complaints against me through any legal or civil channel. Furthermore, Karen was ordered to pay a $5,000 civil fine for misuse of HOA funds for unauthorized surveillance equipment and an additional $2,000 in court costs. The judge warned that future incidents could escalate to criminal charges. As we walked out of the courthouse, the weight I'd carried that morning lifted, replaced by a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. I glanced over at Eliza, who wore a satisfied half-smile. That, I said, was textbook. She did most of the damage herself, Eliza replied. All we had to do was tell the truth. I looked back at the courthouse steps. Karen stood there, stunned, her lawyer trying to usher her away as she muttered about appealing and unfair treatment. But it was over. Her power, at least over us, was gone. Back at the ranch that evening, the sunset was especially golden. Bandit grazed lazily in the field. The chickens clucked contentedly near the coop, and Eliza poured 2 glasses of sweet tea as we sat on the porch. No drones, no citations, no self-appointed neighborhood tyrants. Just peace. But as we sipped and watched the stars begin to peek through the dusk, I realized something else. This wasn't just a win for us. It was a message to anyone who thinks their status gives them the right to trample boundaries, physical or personal. That peace is not something handed to you. It's something you build, defend, and sometimes fight for in court. Eliza reached over and took my hand. Think she'd try anything else? Maybe, I said. But next time she better bring more than a clipboard. We clinked our glasses together and watched the last sliver of sun dip below the hills of Dusty Creek. The secret HOA Facebook group and the whistleblower reveal. After the courtroom dust had settled and the judge's orders were inked into permanence, Eliza and I fully expected life to return to its peaceful pastoral rhythm. And for a few blessed weeks, it did. The barn repairs were completed just in time for spring. Our livestock routine settled into an easy cadence, and the birds returned to nest in the oak trees that lined the eastern pasture. We had no citations in the mailbox, no mystery vehicles parked near our fence line, and no drone shadows darkening the blue Texas sky. But even in the serenity, a lingering sense of caution hovered, because with people like Karen Whitmore, defeat doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it just means a change in tactics. We didn't hear a single word from Karen or the HOA for almost a month. No letters, no indirect complaints, not even passive-aggressive landscaping suggestions. I almost convinced myself that she'd finally backed off. But just when I was starting to relax, the storm began brewing again, this time in a place I hadn't thought to look. Facebook. It started one evening when I received a message from someone named Rebecca Sinclair. The name didn't ring a bell, but the message was detailed, polite, and cautiously worded. Hello, Mr. Hart. You don't know me, but I live in Cypress Ridge. I've been following everything that happened with Karen and the drone situation. I think you should know there's more going on behind the scenes. If you're willing to talk, I'll share what I've found. But it has to stay anonymous for now. I don't trust everyone in the HOA anymore. Now, under normal circumstances, I might have dismissed it as some keyboard crusader looking for gossip. But something about her tone, measured, respectful, not gossipy, made me pause. I showed the message to Eliza. She read it twice, then looked up at me with that narrowed-eye stare she usually reserved for witnesses giving slippery answers. She knows something. Eliza said, let's set up a call. So we did. The next afternoon, I dialed the number Rebecca had provided. She answered on the first ring, her voice soft but determined. She introduced herself as one of the HOA's volunteer administrators, specifically in charge of managing the Cypress Ridge community's private Facebook group, a digital space where residents shared updates, events, complaints, and behind-the-scenes chatter. And it was in that group, she explained, where Karen had continued her crusade against us, even after losing in court. She's been using her influence to whip up resentment, Rebecca said, posting misleading updates about your ranch, suggesting that you're building unauthorized structures or creating environmental hazards. Most people ignored it at first, but then she started getting more strategic. Strategic? How? Eliza asked. Rebecca paused and continued. She created a subgroup invite only, not visible on the main page. It's called Citizens for Neighborhood Preservation. Sounds harmless, right? But it's a covert echo chamber. Only the most loyal HOA members are in it. And that's where Karen's really been spreading false claim stuff about your land lowering home values, even insinuating you might be doing something illegal out there. I felt my pulse thump in my ears. What exactly is she saying? Most of it's just fear-mongering, Rebecca said. But last week, she shared edited photos, made it look like your barn was falling apart, and called it a safety risk. Then she started asking members to gather community statements, basically testimonials she could use to file another complaint with the county. She's building a paper trail, Eliza muttered, her tone dark, trying to fabricate a public nuisance claim. She also hinted at reaching out to code enforcement anonymously, Rebecca added, claimed she had a contact who'd look the other way if certain documents went missing. That was it. The line had been crossed again. We thanked Rebecca and told her we'd be in touch. Eliza immediately began preserving every message and post Rebecca shared. She used screen capturing software to collect entire threads and pulled the metadata embedded in image files. Karen had shared metadata that confirmed some of the photos had been altered using a basic photo editing app. It was all too deliberate, too orchestrated to ignore. The next step? A quiet investigation, unlike the previous confrontation, which was public and courtroom-centered. This one needed to be surgical. Eliza called in a favor from a colleague at the county's Code Compliance Division, someone she trusted. They confirmed that no recent complaints had been filed against Dusty Creek Ranch, but someone had inquired about filing one. An anonymous party had requested guidelines for declaring a private structure a rural fire hazard. That kind of language didn't come from a casual browser. That was Karen, planning her next move, but Eliza was already 10 steps ahead. She compiled everything: the Facebook posts, the altered images, the metadata, and messages from Rebecca, and the inquiry logs from the county. She even traced the IP address of one of the anonymous emails Karen had used to post in the Facebook group. It matched the public Wi-Fi network at the Cypress Ridge HOA clubhouse. Then she went to work drafting a formal letter of complaint, not just for the HOA board, but for the state's Department of Community Governance Oversight, an agency that oversees HOA conduct in Texas. Her complaint outlined an organized campaign of misinformation, digital harassment, document falsification, and potential misuse of public systems to retaliate against a private landowner. She CC'd the county commissioner's office and the sheriff's department. The moment that complaint landed, the effect was seismic. Within 48 hours, an internal audit was launched against the Cypress Ridge HOA. The Department of Oversight demanded access to all internal communications, meeting minutes, and financial records going back 6 months. Karen was immediately suspended from her role as HOA president, pending the outcome of the investigation. But it didn't stop there. Rebecca messaged again 2 days later, nearly breathless. You should see the group now. People are furious. Turns out Karen spent almost $9,000 of the HOA's funds on that drone, and related surveillance tools without a vote. And get this, she applied for a reimbursement grant from the HOA's Emergency Disaster Fund, claiming it was for wildfire prevention technology. Total fraud. The HOA board, now waking up to the mess they'd let fester under Karen's rule, began unraveling fast. Board members who had once blindly backed her started distancing themselves. Several even resigned. The Facebook group turned into a battlefield of public apologies, recriminations, and demands for an emergency election to restructure the board from the ground up. As for Karen, she went quiet. For the first time in months, not a peep, not a knock, not a drone, not a fake citation. Word in the neighborhood was that she'd taken an indefinite vacation to her sister's condo in Arizona. And considering the state's fraud laws, she might need more than sunshine and spa water to fix what was coming next. On the ranch, life finally returned to normal. This time, really and truly, the chickens kept laying. Bandit was back to chasing butterflies through the field. Eliza picked up a new case from the sheriff's office. And I just enjoyed my land, my life, and the wide open sky above, now completely drone-free. What Karen never understood was this: respect can't be enforced by fines or false rules. It's earned through decency, honesty, and boundaries. And if you can't respect your neighbor, eventually, the world, through law, through truth, through community, will force you to. The lawsuit, the ledger, and the long fall of Queen Karen. Sometimes, justice takes the form of a courtroom order, neat and clean. Other times, it comes like a slow-moving freight train, gathering speed and mass until it crashes into the very structures built by those who thought themselves untouchable. That's how it felt watching the storm that followed Karen Whitmore's unraveling. And just when we thought the saga was ending, the biggest twist of all came from a place we hadn't expected: Karen's own financial past. 3 weeks after, the Department of Community Governance Oversight launched their audit into Cypress Ridge's HOA operations. Eliza and I received a message from a name neither of us had seen in over a year: Eldon McCaffrey. If that name doesn't ring a bell, that's because he was never front and center like Karen. Eldon had once served as HOA treasurer, but quietly resigned sometime last year, right before Karen ramped up her drone obsession. He had always seemed mild-mannered, a little hunched, a bit shy at meetings, rarely speaking more than a few words unless asked directly. When he left, the official story had been that he was moving to take care of his elderly father up in Denton. But that was only half true. Eldon's message was carefully worded, but carried the weight of someone who had been holding on to something for far too long. Hello, Mr. Hart. I hope this message finds you well. I've been following the situation. With the HOA, I owe you an apology. There are things I should have spoken up about last year. I didn't have the courage then, but I do now. I have documents, financial records, ledgers, receipts. I kept them when I left because I was concerned they might one day be necessary. That day has come. Naturally, we didn't respond immediately. Eliza, ever the detective, insisted on doing a full background check to ensure Eldon wasn't trying to entrap or mislead us. But everything came back clean. In fact, the records showed that Eldon had been a CPA before retiring early. He had no debt, no lawsuits, no criminal background. What he did have, however, was access to the HOA's books during the time when Karen began consolidating power. And what he shared with us over the next several days would ignite a legal wildfire. It began with an email containing 2 PDF files labeled Cypress Ridge HOA Expense Ledger 2022 and unaudited receipts. Discretionary accounts. Eliza printed every page and laid them across our dining room table. For 3 nights, we pored over those files with highlighters, sticky notes, and a level of scrutiny you'd expect from federal investigators. And what we found made our stomachs churn. Karen hadn't just misused funds on drones. That was just a surface dot. There were charges logged as neighborhood beautification projects that were funneled to a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law. Thousands of dollars were siphoned through what she described as emergency perimeter maintenance, a fancy way of saying she paid for private fencing that ran only along the back of her own property with HOA funds. There was even a $4,200 invoice from a security consulting firm out of Dallas that billed for risk assessment and surveillance analysis, a service Karen had used to try to find legal loopholes to access neighboring properties, including mine. And most damning of all, a duplicate set of books. Eliza spotted it. 2 entries with identical dates, but slightly altered descriptions and amounts, one set meant for public board review, and the other maintained in private backup files Eldon had secured before he left. This wasn't just unethical. It was fraud. Plain and simple. We met with Eldon in person at a neutral location, a coffee shop an hour away from the community, where no HOA loyalists could recognize him. The man was thinner than I remembered, his once wiry hair now mostly gray. He seemed haunted by guilt, but determined to make things right. I stayed quiet because I thought if I left, it would stop, he said, gripping a ceramic mug with trembling hands. But Karen just got bolder. I didn't know who to turn to. You were the first person to stand up to her. I figured if anyone could help put this right, it'd be you and your wife. We didn't make promises that day, but we left with a plan. The first step was handing over everything to a lawyer, a no-nonsense civil attorney named Marla Reyes, who had experience with HOA litigation. She reviewed the files, then filed a class-action lawsuit on behalf of the Cypress Ridge residents, naming Karen Whitmore, several complicit board members, and the HOA as a corporate entity. The lawsuit alleged misappropriation of funds, fiduciary, fraud, abuse of authority, and civil harassment. The plaintiffs were residents who had paid dues under false pretenses. The damages sought? North of $250,000. News of the lawsuit hit the community like a thunderclap. People who once rolled there, eyes or whispered in hallways, were now furious. Lawn signs popped up reading "Transparency for Cypress," and "We want our HOA back." Residents began attending board meetings in numbers never seen before. Karen, meanwhile, had gone into complete radio silence. No appearances, no statements, no attempts to defend herself publicly. But that didn't stop the damage. A week later, the state attorney general's office opened a formal inquiry, not just into Karen, but into the HOA's tax filings. Someone had tipped them off that the association may have falsified charitable donation write-offs, listing donations to non-existent community events and shelters. Eliza looked at the headlines one evening and muttered, "This isn't just HOA drama anymore. It's financial crime." The final straw came when Karen's personal bank records were subpoenaed. While the details remained confidential under court order, let's just say the vacation home in Arizona she'd been staying in wasn't hers, and it wasn't a vacation. It was her sister's third property, kept in a trust. And Karen? She was under formal investigation for embezzlement and tax evasion. I remember standing at the edge of my property not long after all this became public. The spring wind was soft, the sky high and clear, and there was not a sound of tension anywhere. For miles, no distant yelling, no buzzing surveillance, no lurking SUVs, just cattle lowing in the distance and the faint hum of the wind through the mesquites. Eliza came out with a fresh cup of coffee and stood beside me. "So," she said, "you ever think our little ranch feud would turn into a financial takedown and class action lawsuit?" I chuckled and shook my head. I just wanted to be left alone. Didn't expect to be front-page news in the HOA Journal. She smiled, leaning into my shoulder. You didn't start the fight, but you sure as hell finished it. The final verdict and the rebirth of a community. The slow march of justice has a rhythm all its own, never too early, never too late, but arriving with the full weight of inevitability. After months of quiet strategy, legal depositions, surprise, revelations, and a community waking up to its own power, the final chapter in our saga with the HOA and Karen Whitmore was unfolding in a courtroom, not far from the same dusty road where it had all begun. The trial wasn't a high-profile media circus, but within Cypress Ridge and the neighboring counties, it might as well have been the Super Bowl. The civil courtroom was a modest structure, no marble columns, no sweeping staircases, just clean tile, sturdy benches, and a judge who had no time for theatrics. But for the dozens of residents who filed in Bailey, this room represented something sacred, the restoration of balance. On one side sat the plaintiffs' homeowners like us, quietly, defiant and organized. On the other sat the defense, Karen, flanked by two attorneys who looked increasingly uncomfortable with every piece of evidence brought forward. Eliza, though not formally involved as counsel, had been instrumental behind the scenes organizing the documentation with surgical precision, coordinating witness timelines, and working with our attorney, Marla Reyes, to prepare every financial and ethical inconsistency for exposure. And when Eliza took the stand, her calm, steady delivery of facts, not speculation, not opinion, but verifiable truths left even Karen's legal team fumbling for words. Karen tried to play the victim, of course, claimed she was misunderstood, that she was only trying to preserve the aesthetic and property value of the neighborhood. But the record spoke louder than her excuses. Line after line of expenses funneled to shell contractors. Board votes that never occurred. Emergency. Funds redirected without signatures. Fake invoices. Altered photographs. Misleading reports submitted to county agencies. And worst of all, a pattern of retaliation against any resident who questioned her authority. The judge, a gray-haired woman with keen eyes and a steel spine, remained neutral throughout, but it was clear by her questions and the way she cut through Karen's rambling defenses that she was unimpressed. The phrase abuse of power echoed more than once from the bench, and then came the witness that nobody saw coming, Clara Jensen, Karen's former best friend and once staunch ally on the HOA board. Clara had resigned quietly months ago, retreating into silence as the controversy grew. But during discovery, Marla had found email threads and board group messages that painted a different story, one of Clara, growing increasingly uncomfortable with Karen's decisions. She reached out, asking if she could testify. Clara took the stand with trembling hands but fire in her voice. "I love this neighborhood," she said. "I thought we were helping shape something beautiful, but I was wrong." Karen turned it into a kingdom, and we were her soldiers. I signed off on things I didn't understand because I trusted her. But when I asked questions, when I hesitated, she turned on me like she did with so many others. Her testimony was the nail in the coffin. When closing arguments wrapped, the courtroom was silent. You could hear people holding their breath. The judge took the case under advisement and said a formal ruling would be issued within a week. We left with no celebration, no raised fists, just quiet, cautious hope. That week stretched long. But then came the decision, and it was everything we had fought for. The court found Karen Whitmore guilty of civil fraud, misuse of HOA funds, and deliberate manipulation of community governance procedures. She was ordered to repay $178,000 in misused funds and was barred for life from holding any elected or administrative position in any homeowners association in the state of Texas. The HOA itself was placed under temporary court supervision. with an independent compliance officer assigned to audit and restructure it for the next 12 months. The ruling sent shockwaves through the region. Other HOAs, both in neighboring subdivisions and further counties, began reviewing their own bylaws. And leaders, the State Oversight Agency, launched an initiative to improve training and transparency for HOA boards. And perhaps most satisfying of all, the residents of Cypress Ridge banded together like never before. Within 30 days, the community held a public vote to dissolve the current HOA structure and elect a brand new board with limited powers, clear bylaws, and mandatory transparency protocols. Gone were the clandestine meetings, the beautification fines, and the draconian restrictions. In their place stood a lean, homeowner-friendly council focused only on essentials: shared road maintenance, safety, and honest budgeting. And this time, the board included people from all walks of life: retirees, veterans, young couples, single parents. Real neighbors, not self-appointed monarchs. I'll never forget the day I received the official letter from the HOA's new leadership. It was short, formal, and beautiful in its simplicity. Dear Mr. Hart, on behalf of the new Cypress Ridge Homeowners Council, we wish to express our regret for the actions of the previous administration. We hereby rescind any and all prior complaints filed against your property and extend our sincere appreciation for your patience, integrity, and contributions to our community. I showed it to Eliza that morning over coffee. She smiled, leaned back in her chair, and raised her mug like a toast. To never underestimating a detective's wife, she said. To never letting a bully think they've won, I replied. Ranch now breathes freely. There are no more eyes hovering in the sky. No more ridiculous citations or veiled threats. Just the sweet rhythm of animals grazing, seasons changing, and neighbors waving as they pass. And as for Karen, last we heard, she'd left the state, sold her house quietly, and moved somewhere in the Southwest. Her reputation in tatters and her social circle evaporated. There were rumors of additional charges, even a federal inquiry into tax fraud, but I've stopped tracking her downfall. She already lost the one thing she valued most: control. What she didn't understand, what many don't, is that real community can't be built through force, intimidation, or fear. It's built through shared hardship, through standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, and by speaking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Karen built a kingdom of mirrors and manipulation. We tore it down with facts, patience, and just enough courage to say no.